Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co., and today I'm going to go over the only 3 questions you need to ask yourself before backing a game. Now, these questions do mostly apply to buying a game as well, although maybe not the first one, so that's 1/3 of the questions gone. 1/3 of the questions do not apply to buying a game, it applies to backing. The others, in general, apply to backing a game. And we are going to break this up. So even though I said there's only 3 questions, I'm going to go through these sub-questions or the more nuanced aspect on it. But those 3 questions, to just give it to you off the bat, you can skip the rest of the video, you can go somewhere else. Those 3 questions are effectively, is the game worth backing? Is the game any good? And will it actually get played? Those are the only 3 real questions you need to ask yourself. Although, again, we will break them down, we'll have nuance, we'll have conversations. I'll even end with a bonus question that really should be asked as well, although it's not really the main point of this conversation. Let's go ahead and break those down. Starting off with the first one, which again, mostly doesn't really apply to retail, but the rest of them do apply to in general, wherever you're getting a game. The first one, is the game worth backing? Does it make sense to back the game, specifically where you're getting it on crowdfunding, Kickstarter, GameFound, BackKit, wherever you are going? Is the game worth backing? And to that end, you want to ask yourself a few questions, and it is more complicated than simply, does it hold its value or not? It's more complicated. It's starting off with, do you care if the game holds its value? Do you care if the game holds its value in general? When you're backing something on crowdfunding, are you the kind of person who might sell it if it doesn't work for you anyway? I'm always a big fan of whether games hold the value, because then I could back the things I want to play, and then if they don't work for me, I can turn around, sell or trade them, and they're still in-demand games, so I got to try it and basically paid a library fee as opposed to really buying a game that immediately no one has any interest in after the fact. That's why I care with that, but you might not. But if you do, so ask yourself first, do you care if it holds its value? Secondly, will it hold its value? If you do care if it holds its value, will the game actually hold its value? Is it in demand, or is it something that, you'll back it on crowdfunding now, and that $100 game is basically a $40 paperweight 2 years from now? That's like part of the question you have to ask yourself, is the game worth backing? Do you care if this is the best price or not? Forget whether you sell it or not. Sometimes it's not even a question of whether you're selling it or whether, if you don't find that Fast Abraham works for you, will you sell or trade it? Maybe you do whatever you. Maybe they stay on your shelf. Maybe you gift them. Who really knows? But maybe you just care if it's the best price or not. And sometimes it's not the best price. Sometimes the thing you're getting on crowdfunding will be cheaper at retail for the exact same thing, and you're basically paying more money ahead of time for something you don't even know if it's good. There's less testimonials or reviews or anything out there. So what are you supposed to do with that if you're just paying a worse price in advance for something that's less market research available? It's not really it's not a good reason to back the game. Do you care if this is the best price in general? And is it the best price in general? Will it be cheaper at retail? Do you care if there's exclusive content you don't have access to? And is there exclusive content? So again, all these questions have been broken up into 2 little sub-questions of, do you care and does it? Does the game come with, deluxeifications and extra content and 2 new characters and 3 promo cards and an insert from crowdfunding, whatever it is? Does the game have that stuff, and do you care if it has the stuff? Because in general, you might be looking at an $80 game that's all deluxeified like this, or you can get the same thing for half the price. It's not as goodified, but do you even care if that goodification is in there, and if it's not going to have that on crowdfunding versus retail? Do you care about getting it sooner? Sometimes on crowdfunding you get it sooner. Not all the time, mind you, but sometimes on crowdfunding you get it sooner. If you want to get it sooner, that's at least a reason to back the game. Do you want to support the creator? In general, more money from what you're paying goes towards the creator when you back on crowdfunding than when you buy at retail. So if that is a value to you, if you want to help support the creator, then backing on crowdfunding will often give you more of a reason as to why the creator is getting a bigger chunk of your dollar as opposed to retail stores, distributors, all the various middlemen along the way. These all go under that single umbrella of, is the game worth backing? You have to determine for yourself what is worth backing versus getting it later versus getting it at all, those kinds of conversations. But effectively, is the game worth backing is the first starting question to ask yourself before backing a game on crowdfunding. The second question, is the game good? Now, this is harder to determine, although, again, if you are going to the retail conversation, if you're talking about buying games in general, there's more data out there, there's more content creators who've covered it, there's more audience opinions on BGG or wherever you want to go, on even on Amazon reviews for that matter. Anywhere you go, there'll be more general opinions out there if it's available already. But if it's not available already, which is where we're focusing this video a bit more on crowdfunding, is the game good? And again, there's a few ways to answer this, a few determinations. There's playthrough content. You can check out a variety of playthrough content on the games. Usually people will have their hands on it. Not always, but usually people will have their hands on the game. And you can see for yourself, does the game look like it'll be fun? And not a determination. Games could look fun and not be fun. Games could look terrible and be amazingly fun. But at least it's something. With the whole expression, don't judge a book by its cover, is true. But if you don't have enough to judge a book by, then the cover is a good starting point. Checking to see whether a playthrough looks good. Checking to see whether the game looks good. The graphics look good. The art, the production, everything there. The graphic design is a big thing. To me, almost matters more than the art. Art is more subjective. Graphic design is a little less subjective. Still subjective, but a little less so. And so in general, Does the game look good? Does the gameplay look good? Does the game look good? For creators you trust is a big part of this. In general, if you have content creators who you trust their opinion, then going with those opinions of people who've covered the game, and be very mindful of the difference between preview content, showcase content, and actual opinions. Someone telling you this is a really great game, I had fun with it, is very different than here's this game that we're being paid to promote. It's a very different conversation. Know the difference between those two things. Speaking for myself over on Board Game Co., we won't show you preview content for a game we think is straight up a bad game. But we absolutely do previews for games we may not love ourselves, so understand the difference between an opinion versus a showcase that you're getting from whatever creators you're following. Check out forum threads on BGG, on Board Game Geek. In general, if you see a game on crowdfunding, you're trying to figure out if it's good, very often there are people who have playtested the game and or access to the game available online on Tabletopia and on TTS, Board Game Arena. There'll very often be people, even if you're not willing to play the game yourself, there are often people who have played the game, again, either prototype or online access, and those people will often have threads on BGG where they're talking about things they liked and didn't like, and rather than focusing on content creators, you can get your general person's opinion from those people who have had access to the game. Go on BGG, try to find threads, look at the ratings from people who seem to have played the game, although always being mindful of the fact that sometimes creators will have families, friends, or whatever rating games 10s that are the best thing they've ever played, even though they haven't rated other games. So be mindful and wary of 10s. I generally recommend if you see a 10 with a nuanced take on the game, check that person's profile, see how many games they're rating, see if it seems like they're just being recruited for this one time, or they have a good distribution of ratings that seems to indicate that a 10 actually means something. But usually, even if you haven't played the game yourself, even if you don't have content creators you trust, or if you just don't want to rely on that exclusively, there are usually other people's opinions you can find out from people who have managed to play the game. I mentioned, is the game available online? You could play the game online. That is an option. Very often games are available online. I'd say at least 30-40% of the time, games are available on some sort of online implementation at this point when they're available on crowdfunding. Not always, but that's still a decent amount of the time that you can try the game yourself. And granted, you might be like, well, I don't want to play the game, but then you also have to ask yourself, are you going to play the game when it shows up? If you don't want to play the game today when it's available, why are you so sure you're going to play it when it does show up down the road? And there are valid answers. I don't want to play prototypes. I don't want to play online games. I don't want to play in person. So there are valid answers, but still question your lack of desire to engage today. Does that translate into a lack of desire when the game is physically on the table in front of you? Do you trust the designer or publisher? That's another big factor in deciding whether the game is good. There are publishers who I know I can more reliably expect to like their games. Never a guarantee, mind you. But I know that anything Ivy Games put out, I'll enjoy. And maybe I'll love it, maybe I won't, but I'll enjoy the game. Anything from Orange Nebula, from Chip Theory Games, from CMON. These are all companies who historically have decent track records with me as far as the games they put out. Stefan Feld is a designer whose games I generally like. Uwe Rosenberg, I like his games. Again, not a guarantee, but there's a higher percentage that I'll like a game from certain designers or publishers that have historically worked well for me, and that's likely true for yourself as well. And the last I'll say, does the gameplay style look like your type of game? It doesn't matter if someone loves the game, if it doesn't look like the kind of game you'd enjoy. I know for myself, there are games that I always want to play because I'm like, it's rated an 8.4, but it doesn't look like I'd enjoy it. And more often than not, when it doesn't look like I'd enjoy the game, at least for myself, more often than not, that is the dominant thing. I think in general we have to be mindful that most people who are getting games are backing those games or buying those games in general because they look appealing. So your target audience of people who want that, who like that game, who like that type of game, are people who self-selected to get that because it looked like it was for them. Which means don't always just go by praise or high ratings in general. If the game doesn't look like it's a game you'd enjoy, trust your gut and back away. Trust me, there'll be plenty of other things to back instead, or buy instead. Question number 3. Will you actually play the game? This is a big one as well you have to be very mindful of, especially when you are buying things that are showing up in a year and a half or 2 years as opposed to something that's showing up on your table today. When you're buying into this, conveyor belt of things that eventually show up and you're trying to predict your own future demand today, it is a different conversation than when you buy a game from a store, walk home with it, de-shrink it, and play it that day. If you do that. Some people will still buy a game and not play it that day. I'm not judging at all. I do the same. But will you actually play the game? And part of that's going to, again, be subdivided into similar questions. Do you have similar games that you table instead? Do you have other similar experiences? If you have so many area control games and you're back in the next area control game, Why that one? Do you have similar games? Is this going to be competing in a narrow sphere where you don't have enough time or friends or who knows what it is? Solo games are going to be the same problem. Campaign games are going to be a much bigger problem. If you have 15 unfinished campaign games, tell me why you're backing the newest campaign game. What is it about it that has you pulled in that you're like, this is the one I'm going to finish? Have you historically finished your campaign games? Why are you backing the next one? That's a big question to ask yourself. Do you play all-ins that you have historically bought? In general, if you're going all in on a game, if you're not just buying the base game or getting it at retail down the road, be like, I need to spend $400 on getting absolutely everything for this game. Have you historically played your all-ins? Have you historically benefited from going $400 on a game? Or usually are you spending $400 on a game for it to sit there unplayed, for you to sell or trade it at a loss down the road? What is the reason you're getting these games, and will you actually play the content? Just because the game will hold its value and it's worth backing, just because, or you want to support the publisher, any of those, just because the game might be good, if you aren't playing it, it's still just a giant paperweight. You have to ask yourself these questions. Do your tastes or friends group change enough that crowdfunding is the right fit for you? If you find that over time you're getting games on crowdfunding and they're coming in and they're not as much of a match for where you are or where your group is as they were when you backed it, then maybe something that has a 2-year timer, a 1.5-year timer on it, maybe that's not the right business model for the best way for you to get games. The reality is most games are going to be available down the road. Most games will be available in retail. Most great games will either come back to crowdfunding or come to retail. It may not be with all the bling you wanted. It may even be at a higher price point than you wanted, but usually it'll do so with more information out there, more people who've had a chance to try it, more time for the market to validate whether it's good. If it's a second edition, more time for them to tweak or change things. The amount of people who consistently back first edition games and then get upset when 1.5 years there's a tweaked version that is based on player feedback, that's the price of being an early adopter. That's the price of jumping in on these games and saying, I want them now. And you might sit there and say, well, I only had it for 1.5 years before the next one came out. Well, that's 1.5 years being able to enjoy it. Be like, but I didn't enjoy it. It's out on my shelf unplayed. Well, that is the reality of backing too many games, getting too many games without the time and bandwidth to play them. You have to make a decision on all these things. Do you want to be an early adopter, or do you want to be patient and just get those things whenever or however it is? You will more often than not save money by backing fewer things, and you will often not have the same temptation to get those things later, which brings me to my final question for this. I know I said there's 3 main questions, and there are, but there is a 4th bonus question. Would you buy this game at this price point if it were on the store, on the shelf, in front of you right now? If it were right there, you walk into your local game store, the exact same things there, 6 boxes, $342 for the all-in, let's factor in the shipping price and all that stuff, whatever it is. Would you back that now? Would you buy it and walk out of the store now? Because I find more often than not when it comes to crowdfunding, there's something special and magical and charm and maybe just credit cards and not real money in front of us that make us be more interested and tempted in things than we would be if it were on the store shelf in front of us. We sit there and buy games that are the price of a full PlayStation or whatever. Some of these things can get a little intense. You could buy ovens or washers or dryers that are cheaper than board game all-ins, which is a little insane when you think about it. But we do so because it's the magic, it's the fun, it's the crowdfunding, it's that special box that shows up in who knows how long. And again, in some cases, I often care about whether it holds its value. If I spend $400 on something that could have been a washing machine, but then I turn around and sell it for $400 when it's not for me, hey, I didn't lose anything. I got to try something rent-free along the way. So there are conversations to be had. But understand that crowdfunding has a lot of appeal to it and a lot of pulling you in and getting you invested. And not always do you need to get something. Is the game worth backing? Is the game any good? And will you actually play it? Those are the 3 main questions you should ask yourself before you back anything on crowdfunding. And if all those check out, go for it. Enjoy it. Some of the best games in my collection are crowdfunding games. I'm not anti-crowdfunding at all. I love crowdfunding. I just love it with a bit of mindfulness as to what and where I back when I get things. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.